Let's bring it back to studio now, because youth activism has always been a powerful force in South Africa, catalyzing significant social and political change. Now, historically, young people have sparked movements to champion justice and equality. This was through organization and direct action. For a discussion on this, we are now joined by multi-award-winning social justice activist Anisa Mazimpaka. It's great to have you on the program. Welcome to it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So before we get into our chat, let me first perhaps get your reflections on that conversation with the Deputy Minister of Sports there, in conversation with our reporter Katlego Nyoni. You know, it's nothing new. We always hear of grand plans to empower the youth year in, year out. Do you feel like it trickles to the ground where it matters the most?
So it's very interesting what the Deputy Minister has been saying, and I must agree with her when she speaks about, creating art centers, because I think we found out over the years that recreational facilities are what the youth are more interested in, and rather the recreational facilities allow more interactive engagements. However, I think what I also picked up from what she was saying is that the center in Limpopo would be ready by 2026. That becomes a bit of an issue because we want to get youth in those centers as soon as possible, and 2026 being 2 years from now just becomes a bit problematic with the timeframes that are given.
And it's really inspiring to see a whole lot of young people that are actively participating in the discourse, shaping and shifting their communities for the better nowadays. I want to hear from you. Do you still think there is a place for social activism in 2024?
Yeah, most definitely. There will always be a place for social activism and activism in any shape. Until we reach, true liberation, there'll always be a need for activism. We're celebrating June Youth Month, June 16 today. The material conditions might have changed slightly, but the fundamental issues remain that we are not yet liberated. And until such a time, it's very important that we continue, with our social activism, with our activism in all spheres.
And you've been championing many causes, and when we look at 30 years into democracy now, causes change, and when we take that and bridge it or latch it against what the youth of 1976 was fighting for, we're seeing a change there, especially where the dynamics are concerned with the youth. I wanna hear from you. Looking at this, and now that we're into 30 years into democracy, do you think some of the youth voices are finding an expression or are being heard?
Yeah. That's a very tricky question. It's not always so straightforward to respond. I'd say that they're being heard slightly in their own corners. But are we being heard? But if we're being heard, are we being taken seriously would be the question. How much of positions of powers do youth people actually occupy? And when they do occupy such spaces, how much of an influence do they have? A few years ago, we had some parliamentarians saying that Parliament is not a kindergarten, referring to it not being a space for youth, when the youth voiced out their concerns to say that Parliament is looking more and more like a retirement home. But I think we would agree that we are seeing change with the MPs that were sworn in yesterday from across political parties. I mean, the Patriotic Alliance is one of those parties that now have a 20-year-old in Parliament. But I think it's then up to us to keep an eye out to hear if our voices will truly be represented as the youth.
It's also interesting that you say that right now, because this is also off a conversation that was had throughout the course of the week, because what I heard was, there's a need for this intergenerational transfer of skills, because as much we also need people that have been there for a while as well, because they come with that institutional knowledge. But how do we bridge the gap to ensure that they both coexist?
Yeah. So I like the fact that you're speaking about intergenerational dialogues and conversations. And I think that's something that has really been missing. When we speak about youth empowerment, and I think where people get it wrong most of the time is to think that the youth want to occupy the space alone. But it's very important, the point that you raised, for the skills, the knowledge, the institutional know-hows to be transferred. So I think dialogues, conversations, a smooth transition assists with such processes, but also for the elders to respect the youth and the youth to respect the elders, but the elders to understand that, the youth are capable in today's time to do exactly, they championed this when they were our age. So it's only fair that they also allow the youth some space to express themselves.
Yeah, and we're just reeling from what many have called a bruising and a shocking election.
Yeah.
And when we look at youth participation, actually the numbers are quite shocking.
Yeah.
What's your take and your view on that, first of all? And moving forward, how do we actively encourage the youth to take charge of their hopes, dreams and aspirations?
Yeah, so when it comes to youth participation, I think we need to have more inclusive dialogues. But I think the agency has changed from the voices of the youth of 1976. I mean, at least then the youth, under the circumstances and the material conditions that they found themselves in, found themselves being pushed to the front lines to actually go and fight for their rights, not just Bantu education, but the systematic challenges that existed. So they gave us the baton, we existed. Yes, there's the triple challenges that still exist, but the youth seem to have become more comfortable, so to speak. I think we need to have these dialogues, instill a sense of patriotism, social justice through education being one of them. So I think once we understand what the youth back then fought for and what it took for the country to get where it is today. I mean, Black South Africans could not vote before 1994. So why is it that the youth of today who have the right to vote aren't using that right?
Anisa Mazimpaka, listen, thank you so very much for your time. And she is a multi-award winning social justice activist. Thank you so much for your time right here on The Agenda.